All right, America, buckle up. We're diving headfirst into the wacky, wonderful world of constitutional interpretation. It's more exciting than it sounds, I promise. Think of it like this. The Constitution is basically America's rule book, right? But like any good rule book, it's open to interpretation. That's where originalism and living constitutionalism come in. Two different approaches to understanding what the Founding Fathers meant all those years ago. Now, before you doze off, let me assure you, this isn't just some dusty academic debate. How we interpret the Constitution has a huge impact on our lives. It affects everything from gun control to same-sex marriage to, well, pretty much everything the government does. So, yeah, it's kind of a big deal. In one corner, we have the originalists. These folks believe that the Constitution should be interpreted based on its original meaning, what the Founding Fathers intended when they wrote it. Think of them as the strict grammarians of the legal world, always whipping out their dictionaries and quill pens. On the other side, we have the living constitutionalists. They argue that the Constitution is a living, breathing document that should be interpreted in light of modern values and circumstances. They're like the cool English teachers who let you bend the rules a bit, as long as you have a good reason. So, who's right? Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Let's take a closer look at each approach, shall we? Originalists, as we've established, are all about sticking to the original meaning of the Constitution. They believe that the best way to understand the Constitution is to figure out what the Founding Fathers meant when they wrote it. Sounds simple enough, right? But hold on a second, how do we actually what the Founding Fathers intended? I mean, it's not like they left us a detailed instruction manual. This is where things get a little tricky. Originalists rely heavily on historical documents, like the Federalist Papers and James Madison's notes from the Constitutional Convention, to try and piece together the Founding Fathers' original intent. One of the most famous originalists was the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. He was like the poster boy for originalism, always sporting a powdered wig and breeches in his spare time. Okay, maybe not. Scalia argued that the Constitution should be interpreted according to its original public meaning, what a reasonable person at the time of its ratifications would have understood it to mean. Let's say we're debating the Second Amendment, the one about the right to bear arms. An originalist might argue that the Founding Fathers intended this amendment to protect the right of individual citizens to own guns, primarily for the purpose of maintaining a well-regulated militia. They'd point to historical evidence, like the fact that militias were common in the 18th century, to support their interpretation. Now, you might be thinking, but John, times have changed. We don't have militias anymore, unless you count those weird groups in camo gear hanging out in the woods. And you'd be right, which brings us to our next group of constitutional interpreters. Living constitutionalists believe that the Constitution is a living document that should be interpreted in light of modern values and circumstances. They argue that the Founding Fathers couldn't have possibly foreseen everything that would happen in the future because, they weren't psychic. Think of it like this. Imagine you found a recipe for ye old-timey stew from the 1700s. Would you follow it exactly, even if some of the ingredients are now considered poisonous? Or would you update the recipe to make it edible for modern palates? Living constitutionalists are like the chefs of the legal world, constantly tweaking and adapting the Constitution to fit the times. They argue that this approach allows the Constitution to remain relevant and responsive to the needs of a changing society. One prominent advocate for a living constitution is legal scholar Jack M. Balkin. He argues that we should interpret the Constitution in a way that promotes its underlying values such as democracy, equality and liberty. Let's go back to our Second Amendment example. A living constitutionalist might argue that the right to bear arms should be interpreted in light of modern concerns about gun violence. They might argue that the Founding Fathers never intended for the Second Amendment to prevent reasonable gun control measures, such as background checks or bans on assault weapons. So who's right, the originalists clinging to the past like a security blanket, or the living constitutionalists boldly forging ahead into the future? Well, it's not that simple. Here's the thing about constitutional interpretation, it's messy. There's no easy answer, no magic formula for figuring out what the Constitution really means. Both originalism and living constitutionalism have their strengths and weaknesses. Originalism provides a degree of stability and predictability to the law. It helps ensure that judges aren't just making stuff up as they go along, imposing their own personal beliefs on the Constitution. But it can also be inflexible and difficult to apply to modern issues that the Founding Fathers never could have imagined. Living constitutionalism, on the other hand, allows the Constitution to adapt to changing social norms and values. It recognizes that the world is a very different place than it was in the 18th century. But critics argue that it gives judges too much power to interpret the Constitution according to their own personal preferences, potentially undermining democracy and the rule of law. So what's the solution? Well, like most things in life, it's probably somewhere in the middle. A balanced approach to constitutional interpretation requires considering both the original meaning of the Constitution and the evolving needs of our society. It's about finding a way to honor the past while also embracing the future. And hey, if we can all agree on that, maybe, just maybe, we can finally stop arguing about the Constitution and get back to arguing about more important things, like which state makes the best pizza. Spoiler alert, it's New York!